Jake is a Sea Grant Fellow who's working in Kodiak and with the Kodiak Area Native Association. And Jake, I'm going to let you explain it. You'll be more precise than I am, but thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, of course. One second, I'm going to get my slides up here. So
Yeah.
again, I'm a fellow with Alaska Sea Grant, based out of Kodiak, Alaska, and I work with communities around the state on climate adaptation, including last year where I spent a year working with the Kodiak Area Native Association on ocean acidification planning for the purpose of understanding local waters and climate adaptation. So my talk today is a little bit less technical than some of the ones we just heard, and also a little bit more localized, but it's about nature-based solutions and traditional knowledge being used to mitigate ocean acidification across the North Pacific through clam gardens and ocean acidification monitoring. So, of course, ocean acidification is kind of an emerging problem around the globe. But in kind of northern ocean environments, it's kind of historically been a problem as well. And that's just because kind of the cold polar and subpolar waters hold more dissolved calcium carbonate, which is measured through aragonite saturation. So if you look at this map of aragonite saturation back in 1850, Alaska's waters still had relatively high saturation levels, even though this is going to increase in the next few decades as climate change kind of increases around the world. And both in 1850 as today, indigenous communities in Alaska and British Columbia and around the North Pacific have relied on the marine environment for the subsistence way of life and cultural traditions, often through the cultivation and harvest of shellfish. And ocean acidification threatens shellfish due to the increased acidity harming larval organisms and their growth and development, as well as having the ability to dissolve the shells of adult organisms. And one of the ways that tribes around Alaska have been kind of like better understanding ocean acidification in their waters is through a statewide network of tribal ocean acidification sampling. The statewide program is managed by the Alaska Ocean Observing System, and currently 19 tribes around the state are sampling for ocean acidification in their home waters. And this geographic program is one of the broadest ocean acidification monitoring programs in the state. While organizations like NOAA and the University of Alaska Fairbanks and other kind of large technical organizations do monitor for ocean acidification, these are generally geographically isolated areas that don't kind of get into like all of the small scale waters where tribes live and harvest. So the ability of tribes to kind of collect their own ocean acidification data provides a lot of really critical data on how waters crucial to subsistence harvest are changing. And they can be the data from these projects, which have been ongoing for 5 to 10 years in different locations, can inform projects on ocean acidification mitigation as ocean acidification increases around Alaska. And one major way that tribes in Alaska and British Columbia are responding to ocean acidification is through the use of a historical ocean acidification mitigation tool, the Clam garden. So as I mentioned earlier, shellfish provide a major source of food for a lot of tribes historically, and shellfish harvest is at risk as ocean acidification increases. And clam gardens are a historical method that was used to produce larger amounts of shellfish in kind of coastal waters around Alaska, and were historically found from Washington at their southernmost point all the way up to Southeast Alaska. And this photo here shows kind of an ancient clam garden, which has kind of been preserved in an archaeological midden. So you can kind of see like the mounds of shells that have built up over time. And it's important to note that these clam gardens weren't a kind of like small scale occurrence. This map here shows Quadra Island, which is found in British Columbia. And about 30% of the island's shoreline has been found to contain kind of the walls of ancient clam gardens. So these were a massive tool being used by kind of large scale indigenous communities in the Pacific Northwest to kind of transform the coastal landscape and increase the amount of like shellfish available for food production. So it just shows like the scale of this indigenous way of food production and kind of how it was able to kind of provide a lot of food for kind of large dynamic communities. And while clam gardens kind of have diminished in number, we can archaeologists and anthropologists who have kind of like explored the area have found kind of the remains of a lot of clam gardens as we kind of like learn more about their importance to the region. And this photograph shows an example of a clam garden on Quadra Island. So you can see that kind of just like this artificially built up rock wall would have kind of terraced the beach and kind of provided a home for the clam middens like you saw in the previous slide. So this is kind of just like a aerial photograph of the clam garden. So generally they were and are produced in kind of like a sloped mudflat kind of along the seacoast. So you can see that a rock wall would be built kind of just by people in the tribe, kind of like at the edge of kind of just like a sloped mudflat. And then that area between the rock wall and the shoreline would be kind of filled in. And most importantly, to impact on ocean acidification, that mudflat would then be layered with shell hash, which are kind of the crushed shells of different bivalves. And the shell hash slowly kind of releases aragonite into the seawater, providing artificially inflated aragonite levels in an area with a clam garden, allowing for easier growth of both larval shellfish and adult shellfish in the area. And clam gardens that have been created kind of in the past few years have been studied both using traditional knowledge and Western science, and they found to increase clam numbers over 300% in areas where they've been established. So this is a cross section of a modern clam garden produced, and you can see that after being built with several years of kind of time to allow for growth, it can significantly impact the amount of shellfish available for harvest for local communities. Going back to this picture as well, you can see that, of course, being the Pacific Northwest, clam gardens were found adjacent to kind of like really lush temperate rainforests. And more recent studies have also found that kind of shell hash from clam garden and kind of years of shellfish use was also deposited within temperate rainforest where indigenous people, especially in British Columbia, would grow a number of kind of transplanted fruit and nut species to create kind of novel food forests within a temperate ecosystem using kind of minerals from clam gardens. So having an entire kind of tied to forest kind of food production system that artificially increases the amount of food produced and also mitigates ocean acidification at a local level. And again, I want to reiterate that modern clam gardens are now being built again around the Pacific Northwest. So where I live in Kodiak, tribal ocean acidification monitoring has been going on for about 5 years now. And we're just kind of reaching a point where we're understanding how ocean acidification is impacting kind of tribal areas. And we're starting to look at what we can do about it. One method that's been talked about a lot, of course, is kelp mariculture, but that's a kind of like an industrial effort that involves a lot of kind of funding sources, regulatory and permitting issues, and is really kind of like based on a market economy. Clam gardens, however, are an example of traditional indigenous knowledge that can be used to face a pressing kind of climate issue. And modern clam gardens are being built around the Pacific Northwest. The southernmost one that I'm aware of is in Washington, with several also in British Columbia, and then Southeast and South Central Alaska, with talks to kind of build more in a lot of communities around the Pacific Northwest. And again, they provide both the opportunity to mitigate ocean acidification in tribal waters and are also like a method of cultural revitalization in the areas where they're being built. And it's important to note that, you know, I work with Alaska Sea Grant, which is funded by NOAA and part of the University of Alaska, but I'm kind of an oceanographic partner for a lot of the tribes who are really spearheading this effort through organizations like the Clam Garden Network and also the Indigenous Aquaculture Collaborative, which is a group of tribes from around the Pacific region who are working to kind of restore and recover indigenous sea gardening methods kind of around the Pacific. And here are some resources that provide information on clam gardens and their use historically and their ability to kind of like mitigate ocean acidification. I also have a more kind of robust list of resources that I can send out to anybody who's interested. I can put my email in the chat. And yeah, let me know if you'd like more information. Thank you all.
Great job, Jake. Thank you.